Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 2, Home. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I'll have to give a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 6, Episode 2 if you haven't seen up to this point. You may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain spoilers from the book or production leaks, so it will be safe from those kinds of spoilers. Plus, with this episode in particular, I'm tempted to spend a lot of time talking about my Season 6 predictions that I made earlier and what I did and did not get right in this episode, but I want this review to be a bit more inclusive and open, so I don't want it to get too bogged down with all that, so I might just do another video just for that. Also, I did want to point out, for those of you who may have just noticed, I have a new intro picture for my videos thanks to a fan who graciously sent this in for me. So thanks again to Joseph Samuel for putting this together for me. I also want to thank It's Me KLC for sending in a new banner picture that I put up on my YouTube channel, plus my Facebook page, which by the way, if you haven't checked out my Facebook page yet, you should do so. Give it a like, check it out. So, my feelings on this episode overall is, wow. I mean, holy shit. I won't sugarcoat it. This episode completely blew me away. You know, I'm not totally blown away by every single Game of Thrones episode I watch, but this one was amazing, so let me get into it. First, we'll start with Bran under the weirwood tree having visions of Ned and his siblings as kids. This scene was absolutely amazing. The Song of Ice and Fire geek in me was simply having nerdgasms throughout this entire scene, as it was just great to finally see on screen a version of Lyanna Stark whom we heard so much about, even if it was her as a little kid. And you notice she mentioned that Benjen would have no one to spar with once Ned went to the Eyrie, alluding to how Ned was raised as a ward at the Eyrie along with Robert Baratheon. But more than that, I liked how this scene set the stage for Bran and, you know, how he traveled through the past with the Three-Eyed Raven and, you know, who served as his guide. So they clearly established the rules of these flashbacks, that they use a Christmas Carol type way of storytelling, where much like Scrooge in The Ghost of Christmas Past, Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven appear in the past, but they are like ghosts where nobody sees them. And I like how they established this when Lyanna and Ned appeared to be looking directly at Bran, and even he thought they were at the moment for a moment, but no, they were looking past him, clearly establishing that no one can see him and that he has no effect and are just viewing the past. And of course, we have to talk about who they were looking at, and that was Willis, whom Bran recognizes as Hodor as a child. However, he's talking like a normal person, so this raises a whole bunch of interesting questions regarding Hodor. And to be honest, I was tempted to make a theory video a while back about Hodor, questioning what his true nature is, because we know that Hodor isn't his real name. He just got that nickname because he says Hodor all the time. So why does he say Hodor? What does it mean? It's possible it could mean nothing, but it's possible it could have some greater meaning. But what we see in this episode opens the mystery even further by establishing he used to talk like a normal boy. So I think there's a reason this was shown, and that it will have a significance to the overall plot and will be explored more later on. However, I do think mainly that this flashback was cool, as it was a simple one just to establish Bran's vision. And it really, you know, is a cool way to do it, and it implicates things that have yet to come. But because we haven't seen Bran in a long time, they have to set up what he's been up to the whole time, and that Meera is still around, and that she's still reaming from her brother's death. And then we get to see one of the children of the Forest, whom I assume is Leaf, who, just like the Blood Raven, has been recast, but she also has a massive makeup change as well, but ultimately I don't care about that. Anyway, she tells Meera that Brandon Stark needs her, so I think this is obviously foreshadowing that she'll be important later on in the season, as Leaf blatantly says that Bran won't be under the tree forever, so obviously foreshadowing that he'll be going on some adventures later on, in which case she'll be needed. So next, let's go to the Wall, where the real shit goes down. So this is continuing on from last week's episode, where Alliser Thorne has given Davos and the other Jon Snow supporters a deadline to give up, but when he refuses to do so, they begin to smash through the door to bring it down, and Davos and the others inside get their swords ready. Ghost is growling, and we get that great line from the trailer where Davos says, "I've never been much of a fighter. Apologies for what you're about to see." But before Thorne can bring the door down, the wildlings smash through the gate, led by the giant 1-1. I like the symmetry of the scene, as, at the same time Thorne's man was smashing through the door, 1-1 starts smashing through the main Castleback gates. So, the wildlings, along with the Dolorous Edd, storm the castle, and the Night's Watch are vastly outnumbered, so are too scared to fight back, so Thorne yells at them to attack, and this one guy shoots an arrow at 1-1, and then 1-1 picks him up and smashes him against the wall, and throws his body to the ground, and instantly all the remaining Night's Watchmen just throw their weapons down. And I'm sorry, but that was hilarious. I couldn't help but laughing at that. But we came next. What came next, I absolutely loved. When Alliser called Edd a fucking traitor, he responded by saying, "The only traitors here are the ones who stabbed their Lord Commander." And I was literally out of my seat cheering at this point. This was just so awesome. It's a shame that I didn't record myself for reaction videos, because this could have made a genuine reaction video, because I was just so excited. I mean, in a sense, it could be seen as anticlimactic that Davos and his men never got to fight, especially how it was built up in the trailers and the clips that were released beforehand. But considering, how if they did fight, Thorne's men probably would have just killed them, I'm happy with how it turned out. So anyway, even after Thorne was defeated, Ollie still refused to put his sword down and charged angrily at Tormund, but was restrained and thrown into the cells with the other traitors. As you are probably aware, there's been a lot of Ollie hate on the internet, people wanting really horrible things to happen to him, but that's given rise to something I've seen more recently, and that's a lot of Ollie apologists, even, though they're in the minority, but they talk about how Ollie's parents were brutally killed in front of him, and so that it would naturally breed a hatred for the wildlings, which showed up here, which is kind of fair, but you know what? Fuck Ollie. I feel bad for his family dying and all, but that doesn't excuse betraying Jon Snow's trust by stabbing him in the back, or rather, literally stabbing him in the gut. He let his pure hatred and need for revenge blind him to the trust Jon showed him and his words of wisdom about how there's a greater threat. So yeah, I don't care if he's just a kid who lost his family. Fuck that guy. I hope he rots in the cell. So, Tormund is then taken to see Jon's body, and he's obviously mourning his death and offers to set a funeral pyre for him. But Davos has a different idea as he goes to Melisandre and asks if she can bring him back to life. But she's more interested in throwing a pity party, which makes sense after Stannis, whom she had put all her faith in, has died. But Davos gives her a pep talk, saying that she showed him that magic is real and asks if she can do it. So Melisandre does refer that she knows others who could bring people back to life, referring to Thoros of Myr, who brought back Beric Dondarrion from the dead 6 times, but she said she personally never had this gift, but Davos asks her to at least try. So it is interesting that Davos is sticking up for Melisandre, as he's never had a good relationship with her and has often counseled Stannis to ignore her advice and even tried to kill her once. But I totally bought that he'd be doing this here, because he does know that her magic is real, and right now having Jon Snow around would be more important to him than old grudges he has against Melisandre. I do find it interesting that Davos is the one who came up with the whole idea of bringing Jon Snow back. I don't know that Davos had any great love for Jon Snow. It's interesting that we got Melisandre's crisis of faith after Stannis' death, but it seems like Davos should be going through one himself, although I'm not really complaining. I'm sure they'll get more into Davos's motivations and what his new purpose in life is now that Stannis is dead later on. So Melisandre goes and does this chant and washes Jon Snow's body, cuts his hair, puts it in the fire, but nothing happens. So Tormund gives up and leaves, then Ed leaves, then Melisandre, and finally Davos. But Ghost stays, and he wakes up, and as soon as he does, dun dun dun, Jon Snow is back! Ta-da! Kit Harington and the showrunners are liars, as is Maisie Williams and Finn Jones and HBO executive Michael Lombardo and all the others that said Jon Snow wasn't coming back. And I don't want to hear this bullshit excuse that they said he was dead and Jon Snow was technically dead, because they didn't just say he was dead. They said specifically that he was not coming back and that he wouldn't be in season 6. So they're liars. Don't try to sugarcoat it. And I don't want to hear the excuse that they had to maintain the mystery, then they couldn't, because they could have just simply kept their mouths shut like Carice Van Houten and Liam Cunningham did. And I also don't want to hear that if Kit Harington and Dan and Dave said nothing, it would have been the same as confirming, because when Liam Cunningham and the others said nothing, it wasn't the same as confirming. So they could have done the exact same thing and it wouldn't have been the same as confirming. They didn't need to lie. I just think that was total BS. But, to be fair, I was also fed up with how every single interviewer who interviewed anyone who had anything to do with the show had to ask if Jon Snow was coming back. And it's like, come the fuck on, you know they're not going to answer this question. Stop fucking asking. Anyway, this was a great resurrection scene, and it did kind of happen a bit quickly, but, it would have bothered me a lot more if they pushed it back later on. And for the record, I was totally against the theories that Jon would come back as an evil White Walker or anything of that sort, and I don't think that it'll be the case here. They mentioned Beric Dondarrion in this episode, and I think that's the better case example, as Beric was brought back 6 times and said he felt like a different person and that he lost a piece of him each time he came back. But he was basically the same guy. So I think it's going to be more like that Jon will be different, but the differences will be subtle. He won't instantly be like evil Jon Snow. He'll just seem a bit off, but that is just my thinking on it. So now let me go back to King's Landing, where we get this scene that probably went on slightly longer than it needed to, with this poor guy in Flea Bottom who was drunk and bragging about seeing Cersei naked and saying that she liked it. And the Franken Mountain, or Robert Strong, however you choose to call him, he comes up and smashes this guy's head against the wall. You'd think he would have done this more publicly as to intimidate the others to not talk shit about Cersei, but I think they'll get the message anyway. It's really cool that they're establishing Robert Strong as a total badass. When Cersei attempts to leave her room to attend Marcella's funeral, a whole troop of Lannister soldiers stand in her way and say that the king ordered them to prevent her from leaving, but Robert Strong looked like he was ready to kick some ass, and the soldiers stood their ground but were obviously really scared shitless of him. But thankfully, Cersei stood down, perhaps realizing it would be a bit counterproductive to kill a bunch of Lannister soldiers. But damn, Sir Robert Strong is a badass, and I can't wait to see him in action. So then we get a great scene with Tommen and Jaime at Marcella's funeral, mourning her death, where Jaime persuades Tommen to see his mother, whom he hasn't talked to since she returned, mainly because he feels guilty about not being able to help her. So then the High Sparrow comes in, and Jaime is not at all happy with him and is openly threatening towards him for all that he's done, but the High Sparrow stands his ground and eventually gets surrounded by a whole bunch of sparrows ready to fight. But when Jaime points out that they couldn't save him, he states he doesn't really care because they all outnumber him and no one person is important, and that together they can overthrow an empire, which I think is very threatening to Jaime in many ways. So this Faith militant threat is just getting started. So then we see Tommen finally talk to his mother and apologize, and this was actually a very touching scene where she forgives him and says that she will always help him, because I completely believed her and think Tommen is the most important thing to her right now, especially after Myrcella's death. So this scene actually made me a bit teary-eyed, I'm gonna be honest with you. So next we go to Meereen to get a scene with Tyrion, Varys, Grey Worm, and Missandei discussing the dragons and how they refuse to eat. And Tyrion expresses the importance to Daenerys of not letting them starve. And then we get the line we heard from the trailer about how dragons do not do well in captivity. So Tyrion suggests he is their friend, so he goes down to the dragons to attempt to be friendly with them and let them go. And he talks to them and is putting out good intentions, and he tells them, you know, he's their mother's friend, and tells them a little story about how he likes dragons. At first they kind of threaten him, but he takes a submissive posture and eventually unchains them. After he unchains the first one, the other one exposes his chains so Tyrion can unchain it. So I love this scene. I particularly loved the line that Tyrion said, "I'm here to help, don't eat the help." That was another classic Tyrion quote. So once they were unchained, they didn't try to escape and instead kind of just cuddled each other. So I don't think they're completely freed yet. It seems like they have elected to stay there, but perhaps they could leave if they wanted to. I'm not entirely clear on that, but I think we will follow up on them as soon later on, because Tyrion acknowledged that they don't do well in captivity. And of course it was great that when Tyrion tells Varys that if he ever wants to do anything like that again, to punch him in the face. Another classic Tyrion Varys moment. Now some people may have been thinking of this scene from the books where Quentyn Martell was with the dragons, and those who have read the books know what I'm talking about, know what happened to him, but I don't think there's any real comparison here. I think it's totally different, as I didn't think this, because the dragons in the show have always been shown to have a connection, sort of like a psychic connection to Daenerys, and I think that this is translating to Tyrion, and this could be the beginning of Tyrion building a relationship with them, but we'll see. So next we go to Braavos, where once again the waif shows up to beat the ever-loving shit out of Arya, and Arya tries her hardest to fight back, but she's blind, so doesn't notice that the waif isn't there anymore. But then Jaqen H'ghar shows up and tells Arya to say her name and offers her rewards for doing so, including feeding her, sheltering her, and even offering to give her her sight back, but she refuses each time. So obviously this was a test to see how devoted she was to the Faceless Men, and she passed. She doesn't get her sight back, but she's welcomed back into the Faceless Men. So yeah, this doesn't really expand the story very much, but it's a step along the way, so we'll see where they go from here. I am convinced more than ever that Arya is completely devoted to the Faceless Men now, but we'll see. So next we go to Winterfell, where holy shit, some shit really goes down here. So it starts where we meet the new Lord Karstark, the man who succeeded Rickard Karstark, whom was beheaded by Robb in Season 3. And he, of course, holds a lot of animosity towards the Starks. Also, I don't think he is the same guy from the books, as the show is just making up an entirely different character, and they're just going to bypass all the internal Karstark politics that were in the book, which, you know, is fine, because I thought that was kind of a waste of time anyway. And they're just going to have this guy be like Ramsay's new main henchman now. So Ramsay suggests that they go to Castle Black and kill Jon Snow, as that's likely where Sansa is headed, which Roose says is a terrible idea. And then the Maester comes in and announces Roose's son was born. So Ramsay and Lord Karstark congratulate him, and then Ramsay kills him. This was quite predictable, although I did think it was quite surprising. I had a surprising amount of people argue with me when I made this prediction that Ramsay would kill Roose and Walda because they didn't want his son to take over from him. But I am surprised that it happened so soon. And obviously Lord Karstark was in on it with Ramsay, as he stood by and he even helped to intimidate the Maester in order to lie and say that Roose was simply poisoned by his enemies. So now that makes Ramsay the new Warden of the North. So honestly, Roose was really stupid to trust Ramsay, and even stupider to continue to threaten his position. He totally should have seen this coming. Also, there was a sense of irony in the way that Ramsay stabbed Roose, which was very reminiscent of the way Roose killed Robb Stark. Oh, the irony. So it does seem like now Roose is dead, Ramsay and Lord Karstark will go forth with their plans to attack Castle Black. Also, what was interesting is when Ramsay said that they didn't need the support of all of the houses in the north, just the Karstarks, the Umbers, and the Manderleys that control the largest forces. So that seems to imply that they already have the support of those houses. They obviously have the Karstark support, but the Manderleys, well, at least in the books, have always been strong Stark supporters. So I'm wondering if this will translate to the show. And I certainly hope a certain Lord Manderley does turn up in the show. And as for the Umbers, we know from Season 3 that the Umbers were where Rakan and Osha were headed. And so if the Umbers are with the Boltons now, that has some really bad implications for what might happen to Rickon. Implications I really hope aren't true, but we'll see. So then, in a really creepy scene that was hard to watch, Ramsay tricks Walda to taking her baby into the kennel where he has them both ripped to shreds by hounds. That was absolutely brutal. It does make me wonder, though, if Ramsay just alienated the Freys by doing this, but I suppose he could lie about what happened to her as well. But still, Walder might not be too happy that his daughter died under their care. Anyway, this was a really fucked up scene, but something one shouldn't be too surprised to see on Game of Thrones, especially when Ramsay is involved. So, next we see Sansa and Brienne talking, where Brienne mentions she's seen Arya, and Sansa laments that she should have went with Brienne in the first place, which is quite smart of her. Next, Theon decides that it's time for him to return home. Sansa pledges to protect Theon and stick up for him, but Theon says he doesn't want to be forgiven and instead decides to go back to the Iron Islands, which personally I don't really think makes much sense, because if he really felt he needed to make it up to her, he should have stayed with her and given her his life for her like he said he would have, instead of going back to the people that put him up to betraying the Starks in the first place. But you know, plot convenience. But regardless, this was a touching scene, and I can't wait to see more of Brienne and Sansa, and I would love to have had more of it. So, at the mention of Theon's home, we then go there to the Iron Islands, where Balon and Yara are arguing about what to do as they lost their last stronghold in the north, and Balon insists on continuing to attack the north anyway, even though Yara points out that they don't stand a chance. Then Balon goes out to cross a bridge in the storm and comes across a man blocking his way, whom he learns is his brother, Euron, and it's clear that they don't have a good relationship with each other, as eventually Euron declares his intentions to kill Balon, which he does. So I try not to bring up the books too much in these reviews, but I think it's interesting to note that although for the most part Season 6 has moved past the books, this is the one storyline which is way behind. As in the novels, this scene takes place before the Red Wedding, so Balon died before Robb Stark, Joffrey, Tywin, and Stannis did. So it's finally good to finally be able to talk about this, because this is something I had to hold in for so long. So it's interesting how Balon points out to Yara that he's the last surviving king of the War of the Five Kings, because it's not the case at all in the books. Also, this scene with Euron killing Balon happened off-screen, so to speak, in the books, so it was never explicitly stated that Euron killed him, and there's many theories out there on who did, but the show went right ahead and, made it clear that at least for the show, it was Euron who killed him. So, at Balon's funeral, we meet a man whom I must assume is the character of Euron, I think his name is. They all sound similar, but they call him the Damp Hair. And he's another character from the books who is another one of Balon's brothers, who is a priest. And he alerts Yara that she will not inherit the Seastone chair of the Iron Islands, that they will need to hold a king's moot to determine who will be the next king of the Iron Islands. And this also sets up another storyline that has already occurred in Book 4, but it may play out very differently in the show, with Theon on his way back to the Iron Islands, which is quite a massive change, as well as another one of Balon's brothers who apparently is being left out off of the show altogether. And some book purists out there might be complaining that Damp Hair's mention of the King's Moot as if it was a normal thing to do, when in the books it was a rare occurrence, and it was a really big deal, and there was a lot of internal politics going on to set it up in the first place that the show just skipped over. But I am not surprised nor disappointed that the show is streamlining it, as I found it all rather boring anyway, and I don't think the Iron Islands that the Iron Islands is going to be another Dorne, as I actually have faith in the show to do this storyline justice, but we'll see. So, my rating for Home out of 10 is a 10, the best. I absolutely loved this episode and am still reaming from how awesome it was, as it really blew me away. Every single storyline in this episode I thought was pure gold, and I would have loved to see more of each and every one of these storylines. And this episode, it seems like it's the show's biggest problem at the moment, is that there's far too much awesomeness to get into one episode, as I wish each scene was like 10 minutes longer. And so some of them did seem to move rather quickly, but ultimately I don't care, and I think this whole episode was amazing. So that's it for my review of Home. Be sure to check out my discussion with Apkin Tomko, which will be tomorrow, Monday night, 7 p.m. Pacific time in the US, which is 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon for me here in New Zealand, and that will be over on his channel. I'll put a link in the description below for the event. And also check out my channel, as I'll probably be doing another video this week about my predictions regarding this episode. And also check out my channel, as I do many more videos on shows like Star Trek, Fear the Walking Dead, Orphan Black, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.